Hello, it's Miss Heather, piano and voice teacher at Conservatory of the Ozarks. Tonight I'm going to try and answer all the questions on my Handbell study guide from without looking from memory. And that's exciting because I have 4 study guides and this will be the second one I finished if I'm successful. So I'll be halfway done with my preparations. So that's great. My first question is, describe the growth of handbells in the United States, including names, dates, organizations, etc. So, the first time handbells were ever rung in the United States was in the 1840s when the Campanella Jian band came on a tour of the United States. They were from England. They were from Oldham, which is near Lancashire in northern England. And they were all in their teens or early 20s. They started ringing together for fun in the 1830s. It was a common practice for workers to play bells or brass instruments together after work. And at that time, there were no professional handbell ringers. Everyone was amateurs, no one got paid. But they started getting paid to perform right away. They had 8 people in their group, only 7 on stage at a time, and they each had 2 bells, so they had 14 bells altogether. Their director and coach and also violinist was Henry Johnson. They learned their parts from memory and by ear. They didn't read music for their learning their parts. Henry Anderson, I think, was known as the Wizard of the North. He was the magician who invented pulling a rabbit out of a hat, and he brought them to London to perform. I think it was at the Pavilion Theatre in 1840, and then they came back and I think performed maybe at the Adelphi Theatre in 1841. And they were discovered by P.T. Barnum when he went on a tour of Europe to England, searching for acts for his museums and his shows, not for his circus because he didn't have a circus yet. And he found them. He had them dress as if they were Swiss from Switzerland, and he had them pretend to be Swiss because just shortly before that, the Rainier family had come from Switzerland to the United States. They yodeled and they sang with close, mellow harmony, and they caused a sensation, a mania for all things Swiss. So he kind of fed off that by having these English young men pretend to be Swiss. They're just in these Swiss outfits while they played. They caused a sensation in the United States when they came and rang bells. Oh, and another thing about the Rainier family, one of their relatives was the organ tuner who didn't make it to the church on time to repair the organ for the Christmas Eve service from the story about Silent Night. And so he got a copy of Silent Night from the preacher at that church, and the Rainier family actually introduced Silent Night to America that way. So anyways, the Campanella Jian band came to the United States in 1844, I think, and they rang for the first time anybody had done English handbells in the United States. It was September, and it was a really warm September that year. They performed all around New York. Niblo's Garden Theater was a really popular venue at that time, and they had indoor and outdoor venues there. They performed at the White House for President Tyler and Dolly Madison, and Edgar Allan Poe saw them perform and wrote this satirical article about how they were automatons because they were so fast. And Lydia Marie Childs, the lady who wrote Over the River and Through the Woods, saw them perform. They were just very successful. They sold out the theater that was built for Charles Finney, the famous evangelist, which held, I think, 3,000 or 4,000 people. They sold it out for like a week. And they performed at the Battery Park on Manhattan Island. And they completed a tour all up and down the East Coast, the Mississippi, the Canada, and at that time, Arthur Nichols was 4 years old. When the Campanella Jian band finished their American tour, they had a European tour, then they came back and had another American tour, and then they dropped out of history. They actually were stopped in Spain in 1848 during the Spanish Revolution, and the Spanish government seized their bells. So Arthur Nichols, who heard them perform when he was 4 years old, was really impressed. He loved those handbells. And he grew up, went to college, and went to England to study medicine at Oxford, I think. And he learned about change ringing while he was in England. And so he became a physician, and he had a daughter named Margaret, and she went to England with her dad, Arthur Nichols, in 1902, and learned about English handbells while she was there. And Whitechapel Bell Company gave her a 1-octave set of handbells while she was there. And she put those in storage for about 20 years and didn't do anything with them, even though she really liked handbells. She also played tennis at Winston Churchill's summer home. She was a really incredible woman. She was a progressive, so even though she was really wealthy, she went to this strike that the textile laborers were having, trying to protest to get a 48-hour work week instead of 54, and she was attacked by the police while she was at that strike. But Arthur Nichols, at the time he was alive, he noticed in the churchyards all around New England where he lived, there were church bells, tower bells, on the ground in the churchyard, not being used. They were in disrepair, and many of them had been made by Paul Revere. And so he, as an adult, put his own money behind getting those church bells refurbished and rehung so they could be used, and he actually got paid $60 a year maybe to ring them in these churches. He grew up near the Old North Church from Paul Revere's Ride poem that Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote, and it's called Christ's Church in Boston. It's the actual name of it. And so Margaret, when she grew up, married, it's kind of weird, she married somebody named Arthur, same name as her dad, but she married Arthur Shercliffe. And he was a famous, wealthy landscape architect. And they built a home together. They were both carpenters, and they actually built this house, and they did the carpentry themselves, and they made a well and a windmill, and it was kind of a remote location without electricity and even running water, I think. And then in 1924, Margaret decided that with their friends for Christmas Eve, they would ring Christmas carols instead of singing them. So she got her bells out of storage, and they were ringing these Christmas songs at her house. And I guess even today they still go around. There's a group that has tried to keep that alive. They go around and ring carols throughout that neighborhood, that same neighborhood to this day. But anyways, so then in 1950, 1937, she established the New England Guild of Handbell Ringers, and they were afraid at their first meeting at Crane Mansion that they would not have enough people show up, which was they needed 26 to be official or whatever. But they had like 300 people show up or something like that, so way better than they were expecting. And then in 1954, she changed the name and they became the American Guild of English Handbell Ringers. And that is the organization that is still in existence today. They have a publication called The Overtones. They have 12 regions which have annual events. And her uncle was a famous sculptor, American sculptor. His name was August St. Gardens, I think. And she posed for him with a handbell in her hand, and her hand actually holds the handbell in the metal that he made, that he sculpted for the logo for the Handbell Association. Also in the 1800s, there's William Shipp, who was an English expatriate, and he and his sons toured with handbells. I think that's pretty much all I remember about that question. Okay, so question number 2 is name the major manufacturers of handbells. So Whitechapel is an English handbell manufacturer in London, and Schulmerich and Malmark are both English handbell manufacturers found in Pennsylvania. And then there's also Pettit and Friston and John Taylor, but they really only make tower bells. Not really English handbells. Then the next question is ways that handbells can be used in a worship service. So the possibilities are endless. You could have your handbell choir stand in the entryway on a festive occasion and do a peal. You could have the handbell choir enter from the back of the sanctuary and do a random ring to start off the service, like for the prelude, or to kick things off on as a special way to start things off. And then you could have them resolve to the tonic chord of the opening hymn. You could have your bell choir play a specially arranged hymn that's been arranged for handbells as the offertory special. You could have your handbells play a descant during a congregational hymn. You could have the handbell choir play an accompaniment while the choir sings an anthem. You could have your children's choir learn how to play a handbell song. They could have their own children's handbell choir, or you could have the handbell choir accompany the children as they sing. They have some special Bible stories that have handbell parts arranged for them. You could punctuate the beginning and ends of a chant with chord clusters from the handbell choir. You could have people positioned around the sanctuary doing tolls. You could have a change ringing pattern as like an interesting thing for people to listen to as they're leaving at the end of the service. You could have people walking around with bell trees, playing their parts, so they could walk around the congregation. So lots and lots of different things handbells can do at any point in the service. And number 4. Techniques. I move my phone over here and use it to block the answers. Okay, so BD stands for brush damp. That's where you ring the bell and then brush it against your chest to diminish the sound. CD is controlled diminuendo, which is where you ring the bell and then you bring your whole gloved hand up towards the mouth of the bell on the casting itself, especially for a large handbell. The bullseye sign is a damp sign. It can be used for individual pitches, for individual pitches within a chord, or for a whole chord. The J sign with the arrow is a echo. You ring and then put the bell horizontally down on the table. Circle with the arrow is gyro. You ring the bell and then move it in a circular motion to create a variation in sound. A handbell tree is 3 or more bells with interlocking handles. HB is handbells, indicating return to use of handbells, like if you're using hand chimes for a little while. HC, hand chimes. HD, hand damp, where if the thumb, if you're trying to do a thumb damp, if that's not enough, you can put your whole hand on the casting and dampen the sound that way, like if it's a big bell. If you can't do it with 2 fingers, you can use the whole hand. Square-shaped notes are used to indicate hand chime notes if you're using both handbells and hand chimes at the same time. A triangle with a curve over the top is a martellato, which means you smack the handbell down on the table horizontally, and it creates this decisive, staccato ending sound like lunk. Oh no, with the curve over the top, that's a hand martellato, so you put your hand on it and then thunk it on the table. LV means let vibrate, so you don't damp in between each ring. Mallets, you have to be careful to pick mallets of the appropriate weight, size, and hardness. They should produce a sound very similar to the sound naturally produced by the clapper in the bell. A plus sign indicates that you should strike a handbell with a mallet while it is suspended in the air. So you hold the bell and then strike it with the mallet. A plus sign with a dot underneath means you strike the bell with a mallet while it's on the table, lying on the table. It means mallet on handbell on table. If there's an arrow pointing up right after the handbell on table with mallet sign, then you strike it with the mallet and then immediately lift it up off the table. And mallet roll is similar to a drum roll. You just successively, rapidly strike the handbell with 2 mallets. If you have 3 slashes above a whole note with plus sign underneath, that means you do a mallet roll on a suspended handbell. If there's a dot underneath that, then you roll it on the table. And upside down triangle is martellato, which is like, and if there's a arrow to the right, then you do the martellato and then lift. It's a martellato lift. OPT is optional notes. There are also brackets which can be used as enclosures for optional notes. PL means plucks. You take the clapper and thunk it instead of ringing it. PL with the arrow to the right, you pluck it and then lift it up off the table. R means ring, so that is like a return to normal after let vibrate, I think. Yeah, or like plucking. Ring touch means you ring and then immediately touch it to your shoulder to stop the sound. A squiggly line to the left means to roll the chord, which means you play the tones in the chord consecutively rather than simultaneously. And shake means you shake the bell back and forth. It's indicated by SK or the squiggly line. Swing is SW. You ring and then swing backwards. Voice leading lines show where the melody is moving, just like anything else. TD is thumb damp. You have your thumb on the casting and you dampen the sound that way when you ring. TLD is table land damp. That's when after you ring, you land the bell on the table, mouth down to end. TPL is tap, pluck, lift, I think. So you like pluck it and then lift. I think it's just a different way of indicating the one with the arrow to the right. TR stands for trill, which is where you ring two bells of adjacent pitch back and forth. Vibrato, you do your hand side to side, or you can do in a circle to create vibrato. And that's pretty much all of those. Conventions of composing and notating handbell music and designating octaves of handbells is number 5. So, handbells are a transposing instrument. C4 sounds like C5, but is written like C3, I think. And if you're writing in your composition C, like the C3 octave or the C7 through C8 octave, it's best to probably just go ahead and write them an octave lower and use octave signs to indicate how to play those, rather than using a bunch of letter lines. When you are composing for handbell music in Finale, you should set the page to 120% because handbell music is usually large. You should set the bells used chart to 75%. You should have no more than 4 systems per page, and in 4/4 time you should have no more than 4 measures per system. In 3/4 time you can have what did I just say? In 4/4 time you can have 4 measures per system max. In 6/8 time you can have 3 measures per system, and in 3/4 time you can have 5 measures per system. You should write for 1 to I have a hard time remembering this. 1 to 3 or 3 to 5 octave sets. Difficulty level 1, 2, or 3. Like, this is what you follow if you want to write something that's likely to be published and commercially viable. You would pick a composer who has good name recognition. Pick a melody that has a clear copyright or is in the public domain. Pick a tune that is popular and well known but has few arrangements for handbells. And keep the bass octaves open, the bass chords, keep the bass chords open so it doesn't get muddy. When you're writing for handbells, you can either try to write so that you keep all the bells busy so everybody has something to do all the time, or you can just write what you want. You can that's all I really remember about that one. I think that's pretty much everything. Hopefully. Be creative within bounds, it says. Describe how you would assign bells for 13 ringers using 5 octaves. So, you would have for C3 through the bottom octave, so like C3 through B3, you would have 2 ringers and they would share bells. Then for C4 and D4, you'd have ringer number 3, and then ringer number 4 would have E4, F4, and so on and so forth. Each ringer would have 2 bells till you get to let me think, C3, C4, C5, C6, I think, till you get to C6. And then you would have that last octave up to C7 with Shelley ringing. And that would give 11 ringers to each have 2 bells plus the Shelley ringing, and then 2 people to do the bass bells. I don't know if I explained that in a way that makes sense. Describe the different ways of assigning bass bells with 2 ringers, number 7. Okay, way number 1 is C, D, F, E, G, A, share B. Number 2 would be C, D, E, G, A, B, share F. Number 3 would be C, F, A, D, G, B, share E. Number 4 is C, E, G, D, F, A, share B. That's the least common one, and you shouldn't use it in C major. And then the last option is to just let them figure it out for themselves. I think I got all of those right. And that's it! Only took me a half hour. Okay, and I think I pretty much remembered everything, like, pretty good. They're afraid they wouldn't have, 26, 12 regional. Yeah, I think I got pretty much everything, as long as my notes were correct. John Henry Anderson was a Wizard of the North. Henry Johnson was the director. I have a hard time remembering that. So, thumbs up for Handbells. Now I can move on to choral conducting. Study guide. Thanks for watching, YouTube.